Welcome to this special highlights episode of The Brave Front, the men's mental health podcast that combines inspiring stories with insightful expertise. My name's Tim Bainan, and in this roundup episode, we're going to take a look back on the first few months of The Brave Front. Before we go any further though, please give us a follow on whatever platform you're listening on, as it really helps others to find the show. And once you've done that, here's a little taster of what's coming up.
And we were heading up to Camp 1 for the first time. We were just below Camp 1, actually, in the icefall, when the earthquake hit Nepal. And we were literally getting hit by a big blast of powder, thinking for the first time in my life that, at 19, that this is it.
And I don't think I don't think I was ever a candidate for actual suicide. Well, I mean, I don't know how far I got to where I got and got help. So I don't know how much further I could have gone. But it was really, it was tough. Really, really tough.
You know, I've never been drunk in my life, even to this day. I don't drink, I've never smoked, I've never done anything that I saw would affect my body physically to stop me performing at the best level that I could perform at. And, fitness and my lifestyle is, has always been a very big factor for me, and especially during my playing career.
I was very angry, I wasn't sleeping properly, I was having really bad nightmares, just generally incredibly unhappy and felt empty and very numb to the world. And I remember texting my best mate, who was a civilian, and he'd suffered with depression previously. And I texted him and I said, "What was the point where you said, I need some help with this?" And he texted back and he went, "When I didn't want to be here anymore." And I went, yeah, that's kind of where I am now.
Okay, yes, having only started the podcast back in September, this can hardly be called a highlights of the year show, but nevertheless, as is the fashion at the tail end of one year and the start of a new one, I thought we could take a look back on the last few months and hear from some of the fascinating people we've met along the way. When I was first thinking about this podcast, I wanted to create a show that complemented the many other great mental health shows out there, adding to the conversation and, I hoped, contributing something new. From an entirely selfish point of view, I also wanted to get back to my journalistic roots, to dust off my microphone and interview people with genuinely fascinating lives that deserve their moment in the spotlight. And in short, it's been great. I've already met some incredible people and had some fantastic feedback from listeners who've been inspired by the stories they've heard. Stories like that of Alex Staniforth, the 28-year-old motivational speaker, author, endurance athlete and charity founder with a passion for the outdoors, who may be the unluckiest person ever to attempt Mount Everest. But as he explained in episode 1, he's no stranger to overcoming adversity.
From what I remember, it was 2014. We got so we spent 3 weeks walking to base camp. It's a 2-month trip, and having got the funds literally about 4 weeks before the trip was due to start, it all came together perfectly. And we were about a day before base camp when there was a massive avalanche in the icefall above base camp, and sadly 16 Sherpas died. So the biggest disaster in Everest history at the time, and everything obviously fell apart. We had to pack up and go home without actually climbing on the mountain at all. Obviously that's irrelevant because we're going home safe to our families. So I didn't really anticipate for that. You think that the harder you work, then the more lucky you'll get. But obviously the mountain doesn't quite work that way, and nor does life. So it was a chance to go home, train harder, come back stronger, do as much as I could possibly control to maximize my chance of success. In 2015, we were back on the mountain in the same team, same format, very similar. And this time it felt like it was really happening. And we were heading up to Camp 1 for the first time. We were just below Camp 1, actually, in the icefall, when the earthquake hit Nepal. And we were literally getting hit by a big blast of powder, thinking for the first time in my life that, at 19, that this is it. Then be stuck at Camp 1 for 2 days, 6,000 meters higher than Kilimanjaro, being hit by avalanches and aftershocks on both sides. and realizing that actually we were a tiny part in this disaster which had taken over 9,000 lives. So yeah, that quite didn't go to plan either.
Tell me about how that made you feel, because obviously you survived 2 near-death experiences trying to achieve your dream, and after the first one that would have been enough for anyone, but you showed your resilience and went back and tried again, and then the earthquake struck. How did that make you feel after that? Did you feel lucky? Did you feel scared? Did you feel more determined than ever to achieve your dreams in life? How did that experience impact you?
I think back to your point before around, PTSD and trauma, that was the initial reaction. Like at 19, I don't think any age you can train for that. And it should really caveat that I was really, really fortunate because, had we not left base camp that morning, we probably wouldn't be having this chat now, just by the sheer scale of devastation. And sadly, we lost 3 of our team that morning. And how did it feel? I think initially you go into sort of survival mode and shock. You're just trying to make the best of the situation. It didn't really hit me until I was actually on the flight home. And I remember just breaking down in Dover Airport, because only the people that were there could really understand. Like nobody back home can possibly comprehend what you've been through apart from your teammates. And I just remember this sense of guilt. I didn't want to be at Everest. I didn't want to be anywhere. The goal was irrelevant. I mean, goals can be replaced. Lives can't. And there was a sense of luck and gratitude, but just guilt. Why them? Why not me? Seeing this beautiful country just devastated and people have lost everything. So that was the initial feeling. I think when I got home, it was really bittersweet because obviously my family were so happy and I knew I was lucky, but you can't really enjoy it. I just felt lost, and I think there was that initial depression and sort of trauma, and that I don't think that's ever gone away. I still, even all these years later, I still think about that, and I think I always will. About what happened that day. But I quickly realised, like the Sherpas, you have to make the best of a bad situation, and I had an obligation to tell this story, to try and help people, to try and get that message out there. I mean, I experienced 2 pretty unique events in 2 years, and I had an obligation to tell that story and try and turn it into something good. So the kind of knee-jerk reaction was just throw myself into fundraising and to speaking, and that inevitably kind of kick-started a speaking career. I wrote my first book after that, which wasn't the book we planned to write, but actually maybe took a different story. And then essentially I just kept very, very busy. The problem was at the end of all that year, that I just burnt out, and you realize you've been running away from stuff and you've got to process it. You've got to process that.
And how did you do that? Is, as you say, you can only put it off for so long. And did that manifest itself in any way in terms of the fact that it caught up with you?
Yes. And I think mental health wise, like I remember having a really bad episode of depression. My eating disorder was the worst it's ever been. That was a coping mechanism, and I think I realized when it had got to the worst point was like I just going to do a talk at a primary school was like overwhelming, and doing a half marathon and just halfway around I just quit. I just stopped my watch and walked home. Now I knew I could do a half marathon, but that was the point when I realized that this was something I couldn't do on my own. As an adventurer and as an athlete, I was supposed to be mentally tough and all these things. And so I think it happened because it all poured out the bucket, and eventually it will do. But after that point, I was able to kind of rebuild myself.
Yeah, and how did you do that? Did you turn? Was there anybody or anywhere you turned to for support at that time?
I went to my GP. I remember just breaking down into tears, and asking for help, and I got referred to that. But in the meantime, I'd started setting more plans and more goals, and then I planned to do an expedition back to the Himalayas and Choa Yu, which is the 6th highest peak in the world. And that was the only thing I knew was to set myself another challenge. I think it was a case of just letting go of everything, and then with medication, with a few other things, I got myself back into a place where I could help myself.
In episode 2, I spoke to former professional footballer and Southampton FC legend Francis "Franny" Benali about his life in the game, the mental strength it took to succeed, and the insane endurance running and triathlon events that he's taken on for charity and which have rightly earned him his MBE. Franny puts much of his success down to his laser-focused commitment, but as he told me, there was one thing in particular that stood him apart from his many footballing peers.
I quickly realised as a youngster, I knew where I was very focused, even as a young man, a teenager, where I wanted to play professional football. That was my one goal and ambition. I wasn't great academically at school, but once I became officially connected with the football club Southampton at 14 years of age, they were very strong on connecting with the school that I was at, and not just me, but any players that they signed on their books to make sure that they were putting in the effort still on the academic subjects and not just focusing on football completely. But I found that difficult because, I was just so focused and driven on becoming a football player that, it was almost like nothing else mattered to me in my life in many ways. But yeah, I just think those, those qualities of sort of being determined and growing up and realizing that I had to sort of dedicate myself to give myself the best chance possible. And you mentioned it in a way of maybe sacrifices. I didn't really see it as a sacrifice, but when I speak to audiences, I probably said it at the sports awards that you're at, Tim, but I've never been drunk in my life, even to this day. I don't drink, I've never smoked, I've never done anything that I saw would affect my body physically to stop me performing at the best level that I could perform at. And fitness and my lifestyle is has always been a very big factor for me, and especially during my playing career. So you could say sort of when I played in an era where, drinking in football was quite a culture, I was very different, maybe a little bit more like a modern day footballer in many ways, or an athlete.
I was going to say exactly that. And it struck me in your talk at the school that as you say, not having touched a drop in your life, despite playing at a time when the drinking culture was rife across football, I imagine, and in the early 90s and so on, especially. Did that sort of single you out, or were you amongst like-minded peers at the time, or did it take real kind of resilience on your part and sort of mental strength to not go to the parties and to not do the things that some of your peers might have been doing at that time?
I was few and far between, put it that way. I was outnumbered and quite often just the only one. But there were a few others through the course of my career that, were sort of similar to me, teetotal. But it wasn't an effort, Tim, to be honest. It very quickly just became, because I was I saw it as a big part of realizing my dream and ambition. And then when I reached the level of becoming a professional, I then wanted to go to the next level again and, play on a regular basis. And then all of a sudden, the other things in your life come into it. Like, I settled down at a young age with my wife, and, we had a young family, and, we all have those bills and expenses. And even as a footballer back in that time, I may have been earning sort of decent money, but still had a mortgage to pay and all those outgoings that we all have. So there was always the work and the concentration and the effort to, stay in the team, keep earning contracts, and wanting ultimately to stay at my hometown club, because that was a big factor as well. I never wanted to leave Southampton or leave my club, and certainly not uproot my family when the children came along as well.
Now let's be honest, none of us really like being cold, do we? Well, actually, some of us do. And Chris Ashworth, a level 2 Wim Hof method instructor, certainly does. In episode 3, he told us about the power of the cold to boost mental well-being, and why cold showers and ice baths could be the answer to many of the things that cause stress in our lives.
Everyone's subconscious is so powerful. I still have that conversation when I'm walking towards the ice bath. Do you really want to do this? Why, can we do one next week? And then my other side of my brain goes, shut up, what are you talking about? We know this is good for us. Get inside there and do it. So it's, as far as the physiological things that happen to you, you get vasoconstriction in your arms and legs because the body forces the blood towards the core, which is, the body knows you can lose a hand and you'll still survive, but losing any of the major organs, then you're in big trouble. So that happens, you get norepinephrine released into your system, which is a powerful vasoconstrictor. While you're in there, like I said, after about a minute or so, minute and a half, you get cortisol, which is a nice little painkiller that gets released into the body. And also when you get out, you get the hit of dopamine. So you're getting 3 different drugs that your body has produced. You don't have to take them. You don't have to put them on a tablet. You just need to get in the cold and it'll deliver for you.
Presumably they come with a range of emotions as well. So I imagine in your workshops you see an incredible range of emotions, from like kind of fear and trepidation and anxiety perhaps before, all the way through to what happens during, and then I'm imagining they're a big buzz and a positive energy.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's triumph. It's what you see at the end, triumph, and you see everybody triumph together. And another thing that we build on, we call it the 4th pillar, which is community or tribe. And while we're there, you're getting people to buddy up together, and maybe 2 or 3 of you together, and you'll go together as a group, and you'll go in, one will go in and the other 2 will support, and then you'll come back out. So it's kind of, the whole thing is about being together. And as Wim says, there's no ego, we go.
So tell me a little bit about what we could do ourselves if perhaps we can obviously come along to one of your workshops, which should be fantastic. But, for those of us who just wanted to give it a go ourselves, and you talked about cold showers, is that something we could do? Should we go straight to cold? Do we ease it slowly from hot to cold? What do we do? Is it ease it on, or just go wham, freezing?
Well, okay, I'll tell you what I did. I used to have hot showers. I used to love hot showers. I used to keep me in there for like half an hour. And my girlfriend, "Are you coming out of the shower yet?" And I'd be like, "No, I'm loving it." So I started with a hot shower and then turned it to cold, and then was like, oh my God, for 15 seconds. Oh my God, and then got out. And then I did that, and then 30 seconds, and then 45 seconds. But now I haven't had a hot shower I've had 2 in the last year, 18 months.
Right.
Because I only take cold showers now. Hot showers don't feel right to me anymore.
So for those of us who are still addicted to our hot showers in the morning,
start with 15 seconds, edge your way round, and keep breathing, extend your exhale until you get to cold, and then try and last 15 seconds, and then try and take it up to 30 seconds, then 45, then go to 60, and that's the point where you start to understand I need to be breathing before I get there, because nice deep breath will get you through anything. Believe me, it'll get you not just through a cold shower, get you through a lot of other stuff. But also the breath work, don't underestimate the breath work. The breath work, if you want to try that, there's on YouTube, there's some, Wim Hof has some basic breathing protocols on there. And you can do 3 rounds on there, which is just an introduction to it. But if you want to go deep and you're really into that, go and see one of the workshops, because there's loads around the UK now. Absolutely loads.
In episode 4, we spoke to Professor Matt Jones about the intricate link between sleep and mental health. And Matt brilliantly explained the complex science behind the one thing none of us can do without, as well as how talking, power naps, and even a hammock can help us to sleep better if we're having trouble dropping off at night.
So I guess my first tip is enjoy sleep's possibilities rather than fretting about sleep, which I know is easier said than done. But as a society, I think that's the kind of attitude we should start with. And I guess, I'm sure not everyone listening is a parent, but you can probably still imagine how you might get a young child to sleep. And, I have 2 kids who don't need much help getting to sleep nowadays, but they did when they were babies. So what do? You implement a routine. You make sure they're not hungry. You don't often feed babies gin and tonic, but, you make sure they're not intoxicated in any way. You make sure they've had an active day. You make sure they're in a nice, cool, quiet, dark room. All those things, even if you're not a parent, that you can imagine doing those desperate weeks where you're trying to get your blinking baby to sleep. Think about how you might apply them to yourself, I guess. And I know that you can't live your life to the same rigid pattern day by day. Nobody can. But, within reason, you can sort of aim for, you can have an aspirational sort of bedtime, and you can think about when you eat and exercise relative to that bedtime. If you do like and have the opportunity to exercise, that's brilliant. If you can do it earlier in the day, in the morning daylight, for example, outside, that's perfect. And again, just from my experience, I know that if I go for a run first thing in the morning, preferably in summertime when it's light, that will really help me sleep at night. Whereas if I go for a run in the evening, I'll still be a bit highly strung, and that won't help me sleep. It's all pretty logical, bog standard stuff, to be honest. But again, I think it's the attitude that's important. I think enjoy the fact that there are lots of small, subtle, cheap, accessible things you can do to help your brain do its job and to help you just enjoy sleep more. But, for some people suffering from insomnia, I know that it's without, beyond their reach. I feel so sorry for people who are, chronically deprived of sleep. It's just miserable things.
It's a couple of really interesting points there. I think exercise is a funny one, isn't it? I mean, you would assume, one part of you would assume if you exercise to the point of exhaustion and you're knackered afterwards, then you're just going to drop off and you're going to go to sleep. But I know that's not the case. I used to play badminton on a regular basis, but I think our session was 8 till 9 p.m. because that's the only time I could get my friends together to play. I never slept well after that. I'd come back, and my head would just be kind of try and put my head down. There's no way I could sleep. So I'd end up staying up late in order to kind of let things die down a bit in order to get to sleep. So exercise is a funny one for that. You kind of, one part of you would assume you're just going to get straight to sleep because you're knackered, but actually in reality, that's not the case.
Yeah. And I think, take a bit of time to recognize yourself when you're in that sort of state. Don't worry about uphill battles when you if you're getting down into bed thinking, I'm not going to be able to sleep, then don't get down into bed. Within reason, I'm not saying you just stay up till 4 a.m, but think of something else you could do that would ease you into that state. For me, it's listening to music, obviously the right kind of music, preferably. People often ask me what I do to sleep well, and I used to tell them, although now I have to admit I don't sleep that well. We bought better pillows. For years I never really worried about pillows, and I do sometimes use a lavender spray, and that's not because I think there's any biological pathway that leads from a nice waft of lavender to my brain going to sleep. It's just part of setting the familiar scene. I quite like the smell. I associate that smell now with my head hitting the pillow. I think it just helps as part of the routine to sort of to set the scene. I'm not advocating everyone rushes out to buy lavender pillow spray, but think about
everyone will. There'll be a rush on lavender.
Give me a chance to set up the lavender spray company first. Somebody beat me to it, I think.
Music producer Andrew Kingslow has enjoyed a glittering career writing and producing music for some of the biggest names in the industry. However, he has also battled anxiety and depression his whole life. Diagnosed with autism as an adult, he told us about the struggles he still faces in a fascinating episode 5.
I was desperate. I can't go on it. I can't go on like this anymore. The crippling anxiety, the social anxiety, the everything. I was self-medicating in ways that I shouldn't have been to cope with things as well. Just to get me in a room where I felt like I was part of the room. I was resorting to self-medicating. Which in turn was making the anxiety worse. And and there's another. It's just a constant sort of like cycles, and so it was like I need to do something. As for me, primarily, but also for the people around me that care, because it's, it's, it got to it's kind of in a destructive frame of mind, I guess. If I'm thinking this through now with you, I'm actually trying to cogitate it myself, but I knew I had to do something before it was too late.
And when you say before it was too late, what do you mean? Do you think were you suicidal at that point? Were you
I was
having thoughts of suicide?
I was bordering on it. It was becoming more and more. I was fantasizing about it more, and I don't think I was ever a candidate for actual suicide. Well, I mean, I don't know how far I got to where I got and got help. So I don't know how much further I could have gone. But it was really, it was tough, really, really tough.
So what came next? Obviously, that's a dark place you were in, and the charity was there to help you. And what came next?
What comes next is a gradual the gradual journey, the relearning me, the acceptance of me, and who I am, what my boundaries, learning my boundaries, learning what I can give and what I can't. It was relearning me with a new mindset, with new information.
Did it take a weight off your shoulders at all in terms of knowing I am autistic? This is who I am. Did that almost, in a way, having that recognition and that diagnosis, did that kind of lift a pressure off you in any way?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I mean, I wouldn't say initially it was like I mentioned, grief earlier. You feel, and I don't want to. I don't ever take the word grief lightly. And for obviously, I'm grieving something that other people. How can I put it? I felt the anger, felt the sadness, I felt the frustration. It was, but the overarching feeling in the end is relief, because my world is more real. It's more real, more relatable to me. And
what was the reaction from your family and friends and peers?
It's like, what? Sorry, I can move from place. It was something I had to explain very, very carefully. A bunch of people that said, "What? Like you didn't know already?" The usual. It's like it's funny, it's like everyone knows who's the alcoholic, but no one ever tells them in the ring. Yeah, I'm an alcoholic. What, you didn't know? No. So there was a whole load of people. They said, "Yeah, we knew already." I mean, God, tell me something new. And then my parents are like, obviously, I love them dearly, but it was hard for them to understand, I guess. But I just explained it in a way that I could, and it is really interesting. This is the other thing, because I didn't realize that my emotional connection with them was also it's a lot better now. Actually, the way I feel and the way I can be with them, I think it's a lot better, because before I was completely emotionally stunted. It's like there's just a complete lockdown.
Would you have used that masking with your parents and your family as well?
Oh God, yeah. Oh God, yeah. I was so awkward in situations. In fact, I used to find it really, really hard going home I moved to London quite a long time ago from Manchester. They're all still up there. I used to find it super, super hard to go home. The anxiety levels on my way home was so high, it kept me away from home for such a long time. And I never really, unwound all of that, or just got to grips with what that was. But there were, a whole number of reasons. And I think the having to mask quite often as well, actually, when I was so burnt out, by the time I got home, I collapsed. It's almost like there is a safe space at home. And then I couldn't even hardly talk. They say autistic burnout, and I actually was describing my burnout as this before I'd read it. It's like the computer has to shut down, and then you have to reboot. And in order to that process is that everything slumps, your mind, the whole lot. And again, I know I'm going off at a tangent, Yeah, you have to pull me back online now.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
I'm literally just, sometimes I say that and I actually do.
No worries. Going back to like being with friends and family and stuff. Have you since your diagnosis have you felt able to sort of be your true self more, and how have they taken to that?
I would say it's a work in progress. I would say it's a work in progress because I truly believe that I am certainly on the edge of the generation that look at mental health differently. In honesty, there's a stoicism in the older generations that I massively respect. The post World War II, the baby boomers, all of this. I massively respect it, but I think it makes it very difficult to engage directly about what my mental health issues might be. So that's my honest truth. But then there are people that are very open to that as well. So yeah.
In episode 6, we met Dr. Nicholas Peat, a GP who was diagnosed with Asperger Syndrome as an adult and who underwent a life-changing health event that reshaped his future and challenged his mental health like never before. Here he is, talking about how his Asperger's means that he sees social situations differently to others.
With this sort of condition, you have to learn how to engage in social appropriateness. It doesn't come naturally to you. So then I've also had problems with in society, in social circumstances where people may misunderstand me, misunderstand words. So I might say to a woman, oh, you're much taller than your husband. That's a fact. But someone might see that as a diss or a not a socially appropriate thing.
Right.
How would I necessarily show someone that I'm happy to see them without being overbearing? Or how do I establish a relationship? Do I text them? What do I say in the text message? How often do I text? Do I call them? Do I not call them? I have all these questions. I have no idea how the best thing to do in order to get a relationship. I don't know. No idea. And so therefore it's filled also with anxiety. If I say something that I think in retrospect that might be misconstrued or misunderstood, therefore I might worry about it in the night. And then sometimes I might check it with Vanessa, and then Vanessa will say, oh, don't worry about that. But I don't have the filter. I don't understand whether I should worry about it. No, I have to rely on somebody who's socially more competent than I to deal with that. So you can see in the context of like feeling low self-esteem, getting messages back from my wife, bless her, you were at the social event and someone came up to me and said that you look fake because I'm trying to smile along because I don't understand bantering or gesturing properly, like in a pub environment or what have you. I don't get it. My brain is just like dancing between what people are saying, trying to understand what's being said, what's the flow, what's the innuendo. I just don't get it. And so therefore you smile when everyone's smiling, and then you frown when everyone's frowning to try and keep along with the group. But then socially able people can detect if you're genuine or not. And it's not that I wasn't trying to be disingenuous. I'm just trying to fit in with the crowd. And so you get these negative comments back. You've been socially inappropriate here, or this person thought you were a bit rude there. And I don't know who these people are because it's all anonymous. That just made me think, just throw the towel in. What's the point in doing this social rubbish? What's the point in filling relationships? I also use like my wife's failed or troubled relationships as examples to me, where I'm saying, look at that person who's giving you this trouble and that stress. Relationships aren't worth it. Of course, I don't really believe that. I can see that there's great wealth in relationships, in knowing people, in conversations, absolutely. And I think, and I definitely miss it. I miss not being able to have the fullness that I know I could if I was socially more mature. Sure. So I would see myself as a socially immature person, like in a teenager, like kind of some maturity. Asperger was masked as a teenager because we're all socially engaging together. I was a high performer. I was, a high functioning Asperger's person. And so that's fine. You're just getting all the accolades at school and stuff and all the credits and stuff like that. And you can engage with your teenagers. Once you get to a 20-year-old, and then once you get to a 30-year-old, and everyone else is maturing further, in their social skills, and you're still a teenager. Can you imagine what a teenager's like amongst people, adults gesturing in a social environment? Are they not quiet?
Sure.
Are they not disengaged a bit? So, it's having those difficulties that we're pressing, and it's been difficult.
I want to talk just a little bit about your Asperger's, and obviously you've talked through us there some of the social situations you found yourself in where you weren't able to understand what was happening, and very eloquently described for us how that must feel and what that must be like, and I can really appreciate that for you. At what stage did you or when did your diagnosis come about? At what stage in your life? How old were you when you actually received your diagnosis?
Yeah, so it was very late at 38. So this came after a series of, social difficulties, as I've alluded to, challenges with marriage, and had healed marriage. So we'd been doing much better, done our therapy and whatnot, marriage course and stuff. So, things are better that way, but still not perfect. And so, I eventually went for this, but at the end of the day, there was a lot of denial, quite frankly, because like talking to me now, you wouldn't know I've got any condition, right? And I went to work, I did my work, did a good job, came back home, and on most occasions, most days, there's no issue, right? But there were occasions, and then sometimes significant occasions. And so when there was enough of that stacked up against me over the years, I had done a bit of therapy, I've been through the marriage course, then I'm more willing to go down that route, you know what I mean? But if you're someone who hasn't done any of that, not used to spilling the beans and talking about yourself and opening up, then it's difficult for you to go down the route of going to a psychiatrist or someone to get a diagnosis or something, right? So anyhow, I eventually went there. I didn't want to be labeled as well. I had this whole stigma, Asperger's and autism has some degree of stigma towards it. Some of my patients, or a lot of my patients, most of the patients I see with Asperger aren't necessarily high performing, just have workplace-based issues. These are people who have severe mental illness, take overdoses, they cut themselves, they are referred to, if they're young, they're referred to CAMS and mental health services. So, I'm aligning myself with that patient group as well by this diagnosis. So there's all that psychology as well. So after overcoming those things, I was happy to go down the route of an assessment. And so I had that assessment, a questionnaire first, and then a psychiatrist looking at the results and then doing a history with me, a consultation, and then giving their summation about it. And so they diagnosed me with a high functioning Asperger's, or they call it now ASD, autistic spectrum, or they've pulled it into ASD, autistic spectrum disorder. So since then it was a bit of a shock, but to the system, had to get used to the diagnosis. Still a little bit embarrassed about it, whilst other people want to champion it and call me Dr. Asperger Nick or something like that, the autistic doctor. I think someone came up with a term for me. I just didn't want to be called the autistic doctor, because that's not what I want to be labeled as such. So I was still adjusting to this diagnosis, but it has helped an awful lot to have a diagnosis. Awful lot. I understand myself now. Other people understand me now who are willing to hear my story or who know me closely. And I'm also very thankful for those people who, before I had a diagnosis, who were close to me, who were able to still love me for who I was, even though I was unlovable, but to some people. And over time, I just loved me as well. I said I had self-love and low self-esteem. Eventually, over years, I began to love myself more, and then I could be more loving to other people. And certain things I did to try and help that was my own self-CBT, if you like. So I used to meditate. I read the Bible. I believe in God. No one has to, but I do. And there's a verse that says, "Love is patient, love is kind." So I just changed "love is," I put my name in it. I put Nicholas is loving, Nicholas is kind, Nicholas doesn't envy, he's not boastful, he's not proud. And I used to say this, and the verse goes on, and I used to say this 3 times a day, and other verses I put my name in it. And so I just kept on talking to myself 3 times a day without fail, alarm. And I would say these words over my brain, and it helped me. It definitely helped to change, inform my subconscious mind to behave. I reflected also on my behaviors. So if I did make a mistake in my communication, I would not just file it away. I would think about it. I'll reflect on it. Then I'll write it down, and I'll write about what triggered you? What caused you to have this reaction? Because oftentimes there's not just a reaction, there's a chain of events. There's certain things that lead to you having that problem or having that outburst. And so I identified how I was feeling. So she said this to me, that made me feel this way. I went to work and I felt that pressure and I came home a bit stressed. Then this was out of place, or someone took my charger and that irritated me more. And then this happened and happened. And there's always a trigger, and then there's an explosion. And so therefore I was able to say, well, if I'm late at work, what am I going to do? Maybe I'll go to the gym and have a swim before I come home. Mm-hmm. If someone takes my charger, I'm not going to assume that someone's taking it. Now, I may have lost it. I'm going to calm down about it. It's not the end of the world if my battery dies. Because I'm a perfectionist. I like everything of mine to stay in its place. Everything has a home. It always goes back in its home. Everything has a home. And that's just the Asperger's mind. It all has a home. And if it's out of its home, it causes stress, right? And so that stress was born out with, where is my thing? Who's taking it? So all of that stuff now just has gone away now. The emotion still is there, but now I'm like, I reflected on it enough. I've practiced enough over the years, and now I don't react in that way. Therefore, I'm calm, I'm collected, and the thing will come back to me. And if it doesn't come back to me, that's okay too. That mindfulness, we talk about mindfulness. That's all about having peace of mind despite the situation. Sure. And so I've become far more mindful. Peace of mind despite work is not going great. Peace of mind, even I'm waking up why am I waking up at 2:00? I've got an important day the next day. That used to generate panic in me. I'm going to be so tired. I won't be able to perform properly. Even at that point, have peace of mind. It's okay, right? It's okay that I'm waking up. Yeah, I might be a bit tired, but I'm going to do my very best. Let me just be peaceful right now. So those are the words in my head now. And I just rest and I rest. And if I stay 2 hours awake, I don't care. It's okay. I'm in peace, right? And then eventually I'll go to sleep. So, that whole mindfulness and that peace of mind is invaluable, and it's where we as society need to get to, where we can tone down those amygdalas in our brain that just fire off anxious thoughts all the time, and we can just come into a more mindful place.
Now, I like to think that I'm creative. I did manage to cobble a book together in 3 years after all. But episode 7's guest, Afghanistan veteran Pete White, wrote 7 in one night. Using creative writing as a way to manage and work through his PTSD has worked wonders for Pete, and, as he told us, it's been much needed.
It wasn't until I was at the Olympics the next year. I wasn't doing that anymore. There wasn't making myself vomit, and the fly sniper had been retired. But I was very angry. I wasn't sleeping properly. I was having really bad nightmares. Just generally incredibly unhappy and felt empty and very numb to the world. And I remember texting my best mate, who was a civilian, Simo. He's one of my best mates now, and so he'd suffered with depression previously. And I knew he'd been on medications. And I texted him and I said, what was the point where you said, I need some help with this? And he texted back and he went, when I didn't want to be here anymore. And I went, yeah, that's kind of where I am now. So I went to the doctor. I was at the Olympics. I tried to start a fight with Boris Johnson's bodyguard, which was a terrible mistake, because the guy was like upside down a human triangle and like 6'4", and he was a big lad. And that's not like me. I'm a very placid person. I'm a lover, not a fighter. So it was that, coupled with all the emotional stuff and the sleep and all that stuff, that I said, let's go chat to somebody. So I spoke to the doctor. It was a really hard conversation to have, but it was also so important. I would say it was life-saving. So yeah, that for me was kind of the breaking point.
You mentioned there that, when your friend said that when he didn't want to be here, that he realised. Had you got to that point? Was there a point where you had thought, I don't want to be here? And had you ever had any suicidal thoughts at that moment in time?
So at the time, once I was suicidal, I was in a place I think a lot of people can identify with, which is you're not actively suicidal. You just wouldn't be bothered if you didn't wake up the next morning. That's where I was. So when I say I didn't want to be here anymore, I wasn't planning suicide, or I didn't want to kill myself. That came later on. But if I didn't wake up tomorrow, I wouldn't have been bothered about it. I, in fact, would have been quite content, I think.
I mean, that's a horrible place to be. I mean, that's awful. But I'm glad that it led to you to reaching out to the doctor. Tell me what happened next after that then.
So it's interesting. When I say interesting, I mean, it's interesting because the lack of progress made. So I went to the doctor, had a conversation. That was about 10 o'clock in the morning. By 1:30 in the afternoon, I was in a car being driven back up to my parent unit away from London. I was gutted. I was really gutted because I had a team with the Olympics. I was working with a security team, and I felt like I let them down. I felt like I fraud. I was faking it, all this stuff. And I was like, what have I done? I shouldn't have said anything. Went to the doctor back in my home unit, my parent unit, about 2 or 3 weeks later. I spoke to them, and they just referred me to the Military Mental Health Services, which is called DCMH, Department of I can't remember, Defence Community Mental Health Services, I think it is. And they kind of just, I was a bit of a tick box to them, really, in terms of I'd go there. I think it was every couple of weeks. They'd say, Pete, how are you doing? I'd say, I'm awful. They'd say, okay, come back in 2 weeks. That's really how it went. And it went on like that for years. Eventually, I did go on to antidepressants, and they were helpful. Nothing else really happened, though. And that's kind of the whole point of antidepressants, is they just decrease your symptoms. They lift you up to a point where you can then access therapeutic support. I didn't get that. So then when we moved in, mood improved because the antidepressants did say, okay, all good now, we'll take you off them. And guess what happened? I've relapsed. And this happened a number of times. And this went on for probably 4 years, I'd say. It was a really, really long time. And certainly every time I relapsed, things got worse. And I'd become suicidal. So I believe it was 2014. I made an attempt on my life. Thankfully, it didn't happen. And I actually ended up becoming psychotic. So probably about 2015. There's no guy with a checkered flag at the end of this to say you finished now, but I believe it was about 2 months. And I began to lose touch with reality. It was quite mild in my case, but I believed it was my sole purpose on this earth to go fly into Syria and single-handedly go take out all of ISIS, right, who were at the time in 2015 very active. And this made total sense to me, like I was Rambo or John McClane or something. And it wasn't until my psychiatrist actually then let this slip to him, because I was planning flights and stuff and trying to find ways to find body armor and a weapon and all kinds of stuff. And I used to have air pistols at home, and I was kind of trained with them to try and keep my weapons handling on top. And yeah, that's kind of how bad things got, really. But it was actually that conversation with the psychiatrist that made them say, actually, there could be something else going on here. Because at that point, I'd been diagnosed with, I think, what was mild depression.
Okay, that's quite a leap, isn't it? From mild depression to psychosis, and then eventually to your PTSD diagnosis.
PTSD,
yeah. Just listening to you then talk about those intervening years between the Olympics in 2012 and your diagnosis, which I believe was 2017. They were dark years by the sounds of things.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me, if you don't mind, telling me about that day. You say you made an attempt on your own life. Tell me about that day, and what happened.
So things at work have started to deteriorate quite a lot in terms of kind of my relationship with my superiors and stuff, and I always felt like I was being watched by them, and I think genuinely I probably was in some way. I was, for example, I was pulled into the office one day, and they said to me, I was signed off sick for a couple of days because of my mental health in a bad place, and I went for a meal with my wife, and they said, why are you going for meals if you signed off depressed? You shouldn't be doing that and stuff, and that's how things were getting. And then there's one day I was sitting in the office, and my sergeant poked his head around the corner and said, "Can I have a word?" And long story short, there was my sergeant and my flight sergeant there, who was the next rank up from him. And they basically said how this whole mental health thing has been going on for a long time now, and they were getting sick of it. And guys on my unit were getting sick of it. And they didn't like that I had to take time off to go to, therapy appointments or whatever else. And they ordered me to stop, or they were going to charge me. And when I say a charge, I mean like a military charge, which should, it could be like, they might dock your pay, a fine, they might demote you, they might put you on what we used to call jankers, which is basically just shit jobs, basically, like as a punishment. Or like you'd lose a series of weekends and have to work your weekends and things like that. And it was actually that was the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And what happened, it wasn't, the thought process for me wasn't that I want to die, right? And I think that's true for many people. It's that I need the pain to end. And so what happened to me is I got home after that, immediately after. I had a massive panic attack. I didn't know it was a panic attack. I thought I was dying anyway. But the overriding thought in my head was that I wanted to prove them wrong. Then, you know, I wanted to prove to them beyond that doubt that I wasn't faking it. And the way I was going to do that was to kill myself. And what happened with me is I had a 1911, Colt 1911 air pistol underneath my bed. And I had tweaked it to maybe be above power that may be recommended, if that makes sense. And to ill recommended power levels. Loaded it, put the magazine in, racked the slide, put it in my mouth, and I basically sat there next to the bed upstairs with my finger on the trigger. And I didn't think it would kill me, but for me, it was like a progression. So I think before that, I'd already tried to cut myself or something and decided against that. So it was kind of progression up. So I'm cutting myself to shoot myself. And if that didn't work, I would just do something else, basically. Thankfully, didn't do it. And I called my wife and said, look, you need to get home now. Called one of my mates there who was on base and said, I think I had about 3 or 4 air pistols at home. I said, you know, you need to come here and take these away. And I was just an absolute mess for the next few days. I was a complete mess. And then went to the doctor the next day, told them what had happened, both with my attempt at suicide and at work. And then shortly after that, they had put me on what's called a medical geographical posting, which is the posh way of saying, get this person out of there, because being there is not good for their health, effectively. So I was posted elsewhere within 3 weeks, I think it was. So yeah, that's how it kind of played out for me.
And most recently, in episode 8, I spoke to the inspirational Nick Ray, a solo sea kayaker who took a year out from life to paddle around the coast of Scotland. Having lived with depression for 30 years and attempted to take his own life, Nick's incredible honesty was enlightening, and this, coupled with the beauty of his kayaking adventures, has earned him a huge social media following.
Well, there were a couple of events that had occurred that kind of really triggered me, and my belief, you know, it's just rock bottom, quite simply. And I'd seen psychiatric nurse and I'd seen a GP, and I was on my way to psychiatric hospital for an assessment, which would have meant an admission. And we live on the Isle of Mull, so it means a long journey to get to the hospital. So at least 2.5 hours, including a ferry journey. And, you know, I just didn't want to go back to hospital. I just thought it was a complete failure and there just seemed no point. And I just saw the ferry and decided when we boarded, that's, you know, I'd jump off, and I did. And luckily for me, you know, I was spotted, you know, not until the last minute, and I was in the sea for a good while and hypothermic when I was pulled out, and then was brought back around again, and then admitted, of course, to hospital psychiatric care for about 6 or 7 weeks, I think it was. It was a long time. And yeah, and since then I've been in hospital a couple of times again. So yeah, it's not all been plain sailing since then. But I think that one event, it's sharpened my focus with regard to the value of life and appreciating life. But it also frightens me as well, because having been there and attempted it, and knowing how easy it was and how unfrightened I felt, you know, how, you know, I wasn't regretful or frightened at all during the time in the water. It frightens me that, you know, it still seems a peaceful option sometimes when I'm in my deepest lows. So I've got to be very careful. And I really, you know, when I talk about keeping safe, it's keeping safe from that the alluringness of that sense of peace. So yeah, so it's useful in the respect that now I'm far more aware of working much harder to remain well.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's I can see, you know, I can see how scary that must be when you think back at it in that way, especially if it's, you know, that you talk about the alluring nature of that piece, and I can see how terrifying that must be to think in that way. Tell me a little bit about. I read again on your Twitter, and I think an article in the BBC as well about you meeting up with the ship's bosun who saved your life on part of your journey.
Yeah, this was absolutely incredible, and it wasn't planned at all. It was totally unexpected. All through my journey, well, early on in my journey, because I had planned to visit the Isle of Egg, which is an island off the west coast of Scotland, and not far away from where I live in terms of paddling. It's only a day's paddle away. But I never managed to get there because of the weather. And so right at the very end of my trip, I paddled round to the west coast and then across to Egg. And it was a synchronous moment, if that's the word. Yeah, you know, Donald lives on Egg, and Donald is the bosun on the ship, which saved my life. You know, he launched the rescue boat off the ferry, which he was on, and it wasn't the ferry I jumped from; it was another ferry, and that boat was the one that found me. And he described, you know, this boat brought me and you know, alongside the ship, and they couldn't get me aboard because it was too high. And he described with tears, you know, how he saw me in a crumpled heap in the bottom of this rescue boat, and you know, it was just one of those hugely impactful moments. There wasn't a dry eye in the house because there were quite a few people around at the time, and you know, these two big, well, I'm not very big, but big bushy bearded blokes, you know, who pretty rough and ready in their own way, and you know, sort of hugging and kissing each other, sort of in gratitude and, you know, swearing forever friendship, really. And yes, it was just an incredibly powerful moment. And again,
did he seek you out, or did you seek him out when you were on the island?
He sought me out because what happened is, a very small island, and they've got a very tight knit community. So somebody had shared on their Facebook group that, you know, I was paddling across, and he put two and two together, and then sought me out. And you know, people knew because it's a tight knit community. So when I arrived, they said, "Oh, Donald wants to meet you," and you know, so by the time I arrived, and after I'd arrived, I knew the meeting was going to occur, and I knew the significance of it. But the moment we met each other, you know, and just to hear from him, you know, what he had observed, and ever since then, you know, he'd been impacted because, you know, he'd seen me, and he thankfully I'd survived, and he'd obviously wondered what had happened to me, and yeah, and then he went on to tell me what had occurred for the crew, and how the captain had reacted. So it was really interesting as well from that point of view, and yeah, forever grateful, of course. Yeah.
Wow, and it's a day that you know, as memorable for both of you for very different reasons. Do you think it'll mean that you mentioned you be lifelong friends now? You're going to stay in touch and keep in contact?
Most definitely, yes. You know, I'll be paddling out to Egg again and sort of meeting him. I'll take my wife Karen out to meet him as well. So
fantastic.
His partner. Yeah. We've got a beautiful spot.
I'm so pleased because it's nice for something positive to come out of that day. So that's something that's good news. I've got to talk about the challenge and the adventure, obviously, in terms of your sea kayaking around the coast of Scotland. It's well, actually, how big for someone who doesn't sea kayak and has never been in a sea kayak and never attempted anything even remotely like that, how big a challenge is that? I mean, what are we talking about? How many days paddling is it? How many miles? How big a challenge is it?
Well, I in the end, I covered over 3,000 miles, and I paddled for a whole year. So I set off on my 59th birthday, and I finished on the day I turned 60. So really, it was my rite of passage into my 60s. But in terms of the challenge, I suppose the big challenge was, camping and living wild through a Scottish winter. That was probably a big challenge. But for me, it was an adventure, certainly. But it was well within my ability to cope with it, and I loved it. And if I viewed every day as just as a paddling day rather than the journey in its entirety, it was it was within reach of my capabilities. And the whole aspect of the journey was to really enjoy exploring and not to have an agenda and not to feel under pressure to achieve massive goals. I wasn't setting to break any records, so I was really just exploring the coast of Scotland at my leisure, which was a huge privilege, which I did do. And I just paddled around the mainland of Scotland. I did paddle around Skye as well, so and took a year to do it, and met so many incredible people, and and some incredible moments with the wild and natural encounters and camping wild, etc. Beautiful.
Certainly does. Looking at, your photographs and your videos are incredible. They do. It does look like an absolutely astonishing trip. I imagine though that camping, especially, and kayaking in December, January, February, perhaps isn't as appealing as spring and summer. Perhaps am I wrong, or is there beauty in different ways?
I actually didn't. I actually found I enjoyed winter more than I thought. The difficulty, of course, was getting dressed every morning. Getting out of my nice warm my bed clothes and putting on damp kayaking clothes. But the beauty of kayaking in the winter and camping in the winter, there wasn't another soul around. So I had, essentially, I had Scotland to myself. I was in these incredible sea lochs like Loch Nevis and Loch Etive, Loch Horn, and I didn't see another human in the upper reaches of those lochs. And and all I had was seals and otters and eagles and deer as companions. So it was incredibly, rich experience from that point of view.
So there you have it. We've crammed a huge amount into the last quarter of 2023, and I'm looking forward to doing more of the same in 2024. Indeed, if you've got a story to share and want to come onto the show, you can get in touch via the link in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you, so please do so. You can also use the link in the show notes to tell us what you think of the show, share your thoughts on our guests, or give us some ideas for the kind of things you'd like us to cover in the future. And as ever, you can also answer our episode question and our poll on the Spotify episode page. In the meantime though, follow us so you don't miss a show in 2024. Look after yourselves, take care, and I'll see you soon.